Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Total Warhammer 3. I'm Lord Forwind, and here we are with a quasi guide for the changes in the update 2.20 for Immortal Empires. So, if you enjoy this, do like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Comment, tell me what you think was important. Now, the format of this video is going to be different than my other guides. What we're going to do is we're going to cover general campaign changes and stuff. Then we'll talk about all the minor changes to a vast majority of the factions that aren't really deserving of their own section. And then we're going to start looking at individual factions and their changes, movements, reworks, etc. Every single one of those will be chaptered, so you can skip straight to it. And that's pretty much what we're going to be doing for this video. So hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Also, I should point out that a good portion of when I'm talking about changes, at least for the minor ones or campaigns, we're not going to jump in and look at them. The main graphic changes in the video should come when we're looking at individual factions and their mechanics. Just so you wonder, you're probably going to see this screen or a selection of each faction screen for most of the video. This is more of an auditory video than a pure visual one. Okay, let's get started. So the first things, and these are just the general changes. There is some new regiments of renown coming out in this patch for Cathay, Khorne, Kislev, Nurgle, the Ogres, Slaanesh, and Tzeetch. We're not going to talk about them. They're pretty much buffed versions of the original one. Some of them have some pretty cool mechanics, but I'll leave you to find out the details. Suffice to say, in my experience of testing them, they were all decently good. Next thing, we have a change to an endgame scenario. We now have the Vermintide. Yes. The Skaven are coming and they are rising up through the world. This is a new endgame that can be triggered or not. You can simply turn it on and off here if you want to under settings. It's quite fun. Skaven are quite terrifying. At the same time, there was a general patch to endgame crises. You can now vassalize these crisis factions. That counts as ending the endgame. And when a faction goes into its endgame scenario, say the Skaven, they instantly research all their technologies. So their armies will be full strength in terms of they get them, they're almost no upkeep, and they will have all the technology. It is a pretty big buff to their actual combat strength. The next thing on the list is healing. So previously there was a bug in the 2.1 release where healing effects, their cap was 100% higher. That has been patched. You should not see characters, especially say Vlad was a big culprit, healing forever and never running out of hitting his healing cap. And at the same time, undead armies have been considered to be too hard to die, as in they take a while to fall even when they're crumbling. So the damage from crumbling has gone up. So you should see Vampire and Tomb King and other undead armies that are dying die significantly faster once they start losing battles. Another general change is that towers have been weakened. This was to bring them more in line with Total Warhammer 1 and 2 rather than 3. So just be aware, it's a lot harder to hold siege battles with towers alone. Another very large change is they have completely reworked how colonization is handled. So if you colonize a rune in the previous patches, you would lose, on odds, about half of your army. Every unit would lose about half their hit points or so, and then they'd have to heal. This meant it was very dangerous to colonize ruins, especially if there were enemy armies around, because then your army would be significantly weaker. This has been changed to a vigor penalty rather than a manpower loss, meaning your army still will be full strength, which helps a lot, but it will receive a vigor penalty. This is particularly useful for especially single entity or few entity units that take a long time to replenish their units and they're healing all the way back up to full. Additionally, there was a change made to the Winds of Magic. Several factions had no way to gain Winds of Magic easily. Specifically, the Beastmen, Lizardmen, Greenskin, Norska, Vampire Coast, and the Wood Elves had no, say, stance to get it. So this has changed. So the Beastmen now have on their full moon event for their faction, they get a buff towards Winds of Magic. In terms of the Lizardmen, Nakai the Wanderer had no channeling stance. He now has access to that, which should mean his faction actually can be viable spellcasters finally, which has been a complaint. In terms of the Greenskins, now when they go into a WOG mode, their WOG armies gain Winds of Magic a turn. Norska now gain Winds of Magic in their raiding stance, which should make it a lot easier for them to have powerful armies while still making money. The Vampire Coast, now when they hit Expand Flagship at sea, they also gain Winds of Magic. And finally, and I think this is the largest buff to a singular faction, arguably in this whole patch, we have the Wood Elves. So the Wood Elves have two buffs here. First off, if they abduct captives in their post-battle option, that gives them flat Winds of Magic. And their large capital settlements, the full Wood Elf settlements, now give Winds of Magic per turn, just being there, no stance. This should make Wood Elf spellcasters have access to a greater amount of Winds of Magic, meaning their settlements can actually be even more defensive, which is a nice change, because I think the Wood Elves need to be more defensive than they are. Some other interesting campaign changes. XP gain has been altered for battles. Previously, the amount of XP you gained was based off the battles themselves. Previously, if you won, say, a heroic victory, you'd get way more XP than you would get if you did, say, a crushing defeat. Although, to be honest, if you had a crushing defeat, your army's probably dead anyway. Suffice to say, they have balanced this now to the amount of casualties you inflict on the enemy as their proportion. Regardless of win or loss status, it's a pretty nice change. The reality is, if you're losing battles, you're going to suffer XP problems anyway, because your armies will be getting killed off. But if you're winning battles, now winning, a close victory should give you significant XP, just like a heroic victory did. It's a nice change. I've already noticed it playing a campaign or two myself. The next ones is Heroes XP gain has gone up, putting them more in line with Lords. Previously, if you had a Lord or Hero at level 1 and they fought battles, the Lord would level up, I'd say, about a third faster than the Hero. That is, they still level up faster, but it's closer. There is now a new skill introduced on the Lords, and we'll take a glance at it when we actually look at a Lord. It's called Mentoring. It's like a high-level skill you can take. It's beyond immortality for your unit. It basically allows them to share any XP they gain with other Lords or Heroes in the same army or in the whole faction. It's a nice buff for when you get, say, Vlad von Karstein to like 50 and he can't level up anymore. Then you can start spreading that XP to weaker other people to get them to level up faster. It's an endgame skill, but I appreciate the addition immensely, making late game heroes level up significantly faster than earlier game heroes and lords as well. The next one is they have, to a large degree, the intention was to remove minor settlement battles. They made it so that there's a chance it's now just a land battle. From my experience, it has not worked entirely as intended. A minor settlement battle is pretty rare now. It might need some additional patching. Just be aware that minor settlements, you're going to be fighting on battle maps more than in settlements. In addition, garrisons have now been reworked to some degree. Buildings that grant units now sometimes provide a garrison hero to your garrison. This means there's actually an incentive to build some of those buildings, even if you might not recruit from there, just to give your city a stronger garrison. Major settlement sieges and battles are unaffected by the changes to minor settlements, just in case you were worried about that. Although I will point out at this point that a strategy that used to be a thing, using invisible units, stealth units, to take capture points, is no longer as viable a strategy. The AI is now aware that their point is being captured and will go after those units. So you can't cheese settlement battles anymore. In addition, there is a change to how aggressive the AI is. This is a change that Creative Assembly has said they will have to monitor, and I think honestly they've gone too far overboard. They've made it so that the AIs are significantly more aggressive. They will attack more, they will attack more often. Now, if you're a really good player, you might not see as big of an impact because you play more defensively, and all it really is more money coming to your settlements if you're good at defending. But people who are new to the game are suffering. The Empire has gotten harder to play. It was already difficult. The High Elves have issues as well. Um, all told, I think they have to scale it down just a bit, or at least remove some of the anti-player bias even more. On the other hand, to combat the increased AI aggression, as well as some of the garrison changes, there are now special garrisons at several settlements. For the Tomb Kings, Khemri, Lamia, and the Black Pyramid all have special garrison units that get several more units than a normal large settlement would have. Makes them less needed to have a strong army and garrison to defend them. For the High Elves, you've got Tor, Yerves, Gain, Vale, and Lothrin have their special garrisons back. I think they should be a little bit stronger, but that's a personal opinion. The Skaven in Skaven Blight and Hellpit have special garrisons, as well as the Lizardmen and Xoatl and Itza. The Dwarves have a special garrison at Karaz Akarak. Kind of interesting, it's at none of the others yet. The Dark Elves have it in Nagarond, nowhere else. The Empire have it in Altdorf. This is actually a very nice change because it means Franz isn't worried about his capital getting sniped randomly. There was a lot of issues with Altdorf, and most of them have been patched. The Vampire Counts have it at Castle Drakenhof, which is a nice change, meaning it's no longer as vulnerable to sniping by dwarven factions. Corone, so Bretonia has it as well in Corone, and Cathay has it in Wei Jin. All told, it's a very nice change. I think they need to either be stronger or more settlements need to have it. But it is a nice change bringing that back. A change that was also made and was heavily demanded was that the AI will no longer be able to declare war on your vassals and thereby call you into the war. They will now declare war on you rather than your vassal. This means that if the vassal is between you and the AI, war is less likely. Where previously they would take the vassal's strength consideration into account and attack them because they want their lands. But since you're further away, they're slightly less likely to attack you. It is a very nice change. Factions that play with vassals, Warriors of Chaos, in particular, will see a reduction in internal wars between other Warriors of Chaos and Chaos worshipping factions. I still think it needs a little bit of tweaking, but it's still really good. Another change was that the AI is better using their agents. They will now embed more of them in their armies and have less swarm packs, as they were described by multiple people, of agents roaming the land and just ganging up on one of your armies and hitting them with every effect under the sun. Hopefully that is fully implemented. I noticed a slight change, but I haven't noticed an immense change myself. In addition, the AI will be less likely to declare war on you if you're further away. They've implemented this whole regional focus system, so the AI tends to prioritize lands and factions near them rather than, say, if you were playing the High Elves, getting declared war on by, say, Volkmar the Grim. Makes no sense, but it would happen. In addition, the AI has become smarter with their buildings. They're more likely to put in garrisons and landmarks, as well as put buildings like barracks and stuff that may only go up to level 3 in minor settlements rather than taking up space in their major settlements. Also, a tip for players: if your building only goes up to level 3, don't put it in one of your major settlements unless you're afraid you can never defend the minor settlement and you need those units. Put it in your minor settlement, save the space in your major settlement. The only exception I can think of to that rule might be Skaven Blight, just because it has so many building slots. Another change: confederations were altered. The public order penalty went down, and the ability to confederate factions has gone up. It wasn't back to the way it was before, where you could easily confederate everybody, but the natural aversion penalty is down. It is a very nice change. Okay, let's talk about some of the minor changes to the factions that don't warrant their own section. So this is going to go pretty quickly here. So Bretonia had a buff to most of their cav unit. They move like 3 speed faster. The Build a Demon faction of the Demons of Chaos now receives post-battle outcomes depending on various lords in the area, recruitment, speed, replenishment type stuff. It's quite nice, but it's not an immense change. Faction still sucks. The dwarves have received a reduction to their grudges. They're less severe. They increase slower. This should help people who are struggling with some of their public order problems. I still recommend taking the tech to give you public order, which pretty much totally offsets grudges anyhow. And the other thing is, if we look at Beligar Ironhammer, he received a change to his Lord effects. He's now a missile block chance plus 20 on the Lord's army. This helps significantly with them fighting against Skaven and other factions that tend to have range. Be aware, if you're a Beligar player, that a lot of some of the Skaven units, like their Jezzails and their gunners, pretty much ignore shields anyway, but against other missile units, it's a very nice change for Beligar. If you were playing Grand Cathay in the Souls Race mode rather than Immortal Empires, you'll know that the Compass had the ability to blast everything outside the Grand Bastion. Well, in Immortal Empires, that wasn't working as intended and has since forth been patched, which is a very nice change because it actually means defending the Grand Bastion is easier. Not that it was that hard to begin with. Still needs a bit of a rework, but it is a nice little change. For the Greenskins, you had a lot of various patches. Some settlements weren't working, some quests, but the biggest change that I noted is that Skarsnik had on his faction effects character experience gain plus 100 on all heroes. In some cases, that wasn't working. It supposedly has been totally fixed, meaning that Skarsnik can now focus on heroes as he was meant to. In addition, the giant unit in all factions received a buff, so the Greenskins giant is significantly stronger as well. It's a great single entity, hard hitting unit. Okay, we are finally getting into the various demonic factions, starting with Khorne. By and large, the demonic factions didn't have too many changes. In the case of Khorne, it was mainly multiplayer battle patches. So if you play them in multiplayer, be aware that your costs have been altered, mainly to become cheaper in the case of Khorne, as well as some slight tweaks to their units. Okay, here we are with Norska. If you were a big Norska fan because they had the best campaign experience, I'm sorry, but the heyday of Norska is probably dead. There were changes and buffs to both their Wolves unit as well as their Giant units, but the big problem is that your land economy was heavily nerfed. Most of your buildings give you income from land or cut in half. Thankfully, your port income is still going strong, but don't expect to be able to build a large, wealthy land empire anymore. It's kind of sad, but it needed to happen, I think. In terms of the changes made to the Nurgle faction, it's mainly multiplayer changes. There was a couple patches, but they don't really bear mentioning. Just be aware that some of the cost and unit damage has been rebalanced in multiplayer battles. In terms of Slaanesh, we had changes made to how disciple armies are done. Previously, when you raised a disciple army, it would count towards your supply limit, costing you money. That no longer occurs. Your unholy manifestation disciple armies, which you could spawn tons of them, now get larger and stronger based off the Slaaneshi corruption in your lands. In addition, Nikari victory conditions could be met by vassalizing/subjugating factions rather than having to destroy them, which is a nice change for a faction that's supposed to be about vassalizing. Combining this with the fact that AIs are less likely to declare war on, can't declare war on your vassals and are less likely to declare war on you. It means building a bit of a vassal network is a bit more of a dream, Still doesn't solve the corruption issue, unfortunately. Okay, here we are with the Tomb Kings. This was about a touch and go section. I almost made this into a separate one, but we'll talk about it here. So, some people like Camry have gained a hero at the start. High Queen Khalida's short victory conditions have been altered to focus more on the vampires, and their hero capacity can now be endlessly increased using the mortuary cult, similar to how army capacity could be increased as well. This is a very nice change because the Tomb Kings, although they get a lot of heroes early on, tended to suffer late game where they couldn't keep up with the hero capacity creation like other factions could. In terms of the Vampire Coast, there were virtually no changes. There were some issues that were patched and mended, but overall, no significant changes. In terms of the vampire counts, your Banshee unit has been altered to be more armor piercing rather than normal damage. This is because it's an ethereal unit and they brought it in line with the others. I will point out here, and this also applies to both the Tomb Kings and the Vampire Coast, the Mentor skill is now immensely powerful, specifically on the Vampire Counts, because you get a vast amount of immortal lords early on, level them up faster, and then you can level up heroes and others. It's a very nice synergy change for them. Okay, Warriors of Chaos. So the Warriors of Chaos, they can now the mono god Warriors of Chaos, or semi mono god Warriors of Chaos, can now get exalted versions of their demonic infantry rather than the base ones. This is particularly strong. Getting exalted Bloodthirsters or exalted Demonettes are massively better than their baseline unit. And in addition, the Lord Bellicor here has received nerfs specifically in general combat. Some of his portals have been patched, but he received a huge nerf for multiplayer. His abilities have been brought back into line with everyone else. So if you were a Bellicor main, I'm sorry, but you have received some pain and suffering here. Okay, let's talk about some major changes to factions that deserve their own section. So the first one here is the Beastmen. Remember, they've now got the full moon event giving them Winds of Magic, which is nice. In addition, if they take the Oak of Ages, they now get a special herd stone there. It's worth going to see. It's quite cool. Their Chaos Spawn, Giants, and Minotaur units are all stronger, have been buffed. And Torox himself here, which is why we're on him, has received some changes to his momentum. So his first battle of a turn gives him additional momentum. He doesn't now lose momentum after he finishes a rampage, which is a very nice change. It allows you to keep the momentum high. And when he starts a new rampage, he immediately gets +3 momentum, allowing him to use it more often for movements and battles. It's not quite bringing him back to the power he had in Total Warhammer 2, but it does actually mean his mechanic matters once again. Okay, let's talk about the Dark Elves. So the Dark Elves received several changes. We're going to start here with Morathi. So big thing for Morathi is Grey Rock Point here and the Moon Shard, which were previously owned by the Norska minor Skeggi faction, have now been returned to the Dark Elves in the area, meaning you can once again unite the area without going to war with one of your more likely allies. In addition, there was an issue with Morathi's cultist gathering here where it was spreading chaos undivided corruption. It's now been fully patched to spread Slaaneshi corruption or Slaanesh corruption. Now, in addition, there were some changes made to how slaves work, and I can't pretend to say I understand all of them. Suffice to say, there is now global effects. So as this number gets higher and higher, you'll start to see a global effects, increased income, decreased construction time. On the other hand, you will now lose public order if you have too many slaves. Okay, so that's one change. Now, an additional change here is to your public order. As your public order falls, you'll see that there is now slaves used by buildings. So as your public orders falls, you will end up using more slaves to keep your buildings functioning. Now, I still don't agree with the cost of all the slaves and all the buildings because those have been reworked as well. We'll take a look at that. First off, stuff like your farms have been reworked to shift some of your growth into having slaves working the building, which makes some sense. When total slaves are higher than 100, now the effects of all these drains on the building will not occur if you have less than 100 global slaves. However, if you are using the artisan house, if you have over the 100 slaves, this is where you make more money. Some of the values have been shifted, but the slaves per turn is still really high. The 100 limit still means if you ever pass 100, you're basically going to drop to 100 again. My advice to a large degree is to ignore this mechanic in gameplay. And if you get the bonuses of slaves, you get the bonuses of slaves. The reason I say that is this slaves pen building still only gives you 40 slaves a turn maxed out, which doesn't even allow you to maintain a level 3 industry in your settlement. Now, in addition, roads were reworked to reduce the cost for slave dictats in your area, which are, of course, over here. I still recommend you do the growth one early on rather than the control or the money. Growth is huge. The Dark Elves now have the highest growth of any faction in the game. There is an alteration to one of their commandments, and I obviously don't own a full settlement here, so I can't show it. But previously, it cost you, I believe, 50 slaves a turn and gave you 25 growth, as well as increased money from slaves. That has now been buffed to 50 growth a turn and still costs you 50 slaves and gives money. So this means if you end up with like 400 or 500 slaves, what you can do is pop this slave drive diktat as well as put an edict on it, and you can get plus 100 growth in your provinces. It's very strong, especially on people like Malekith, who can very quickly gain slaves from fighting the Skaven to trigger this effect. Nagaron then grows very quickly. Marathi as well, since you'll fight several battles here in addition. Those are the major changes to the Dark Elves. There were some tweaks and stuff to some of the units, costs, and damage, but it wasn't that big. Suffice to say, I don't necessarily still like the slave mechanic. Creative Assembly is still reviewing it, so we are likely to see future changes in the future. Okay, we are here with the High Elves. This is probably going to be the longest section of this update guide. So we have two movement changes, but we'll look at Teclis first. So Teclis previously lurked up here near Krogar. He has now moved and apparently kicked out Kairos Fate Weaver from the Fortress of Dawn, which is actually a nice change for him. It puts him in an easier starting position because now he can either go south or east rather than having to go south into the Skavens. On the other hand, you don't gain as easy access to the gold mines. You only are now at war with a Tzeetch faction here, these Watcher people. It's a little bit difficult to beat them. You can do it. You win the first battle. Then you have a slight problem here in that you can't easily take one of these settlements unless you personally command it. I do advise trying to win the battle and retreat. The downside here is it takes you multiple turns to pull this off. If you want to win the first battle, this is what you would do. You'd win it, spend a turn retreating, then rebuild. An easier solution is honestly just ignore the starting battle. Go take like Tors Supindar, add this guy in. Oops. Quickly add it in. And just either ignore him. I wouldn't necessarily go for Dawn's Light. I'd just go for Tor Supindar. Take it out. Now this is a battle you're probably going to want to fight on the battle map so you don't take lots of casualties. Because the worst thing for you to do would be lose tons of units. This might be the only time I advise necessarily looting one of your starting settlements in your starting area. Because it will replenish units enough that this guy here is weaker than you, so he probably will not attack you. If you personally fight the battle, still worth it anyway. Now you own a settlement in the area, you can recruit. And the march distance between these two is short enough that given a turn or two, you can build up and take them out. Afterwards, You can go south, pursuing your victory conditions to take out Kairos Fate Weaver. The reality, in my opinion, is you're going to want to go northeast here, take out the Skaven in the area, gain access to the gold mines and other trade, as well as meet up with Krogar, who, if you can get an alliance with, is quite useful. And that was the only major change to Teclis. I think it's a good one. It does change his starting speed a bit. I think it improves it. He expands a bit faster now. But all told, Teclis is still not an overwhelmingly strong faction. On to the next change lord. Alathanar has been moved. So Alathanar previously lurked up here in Black Creek Spire. He has now been moved to Monoliths. And very nicely, he's been given his unique building, allowing him to train Shadow Walkers and Warriors from the beginning. It is a nice change. He now is still fighting the same people, but he's got a better way to expand. He just can go east. Whether it's a good change or bad change, I'm a bit torn on it. Now, it does allow him 6 settlements in a row to expand to. Previously, he kind of had that already. The downside is he's more likely to be attacked by Malekith from Nagorond, and from the south by Silestra Direfin, the Vampire Coast. Yeah, I don't have tons to say about it. The change, it wasn't so drastic as say Teclis. And in fact, the patch notes about the change basically says it was hard for him to convincingly brood out here in Karand Kar, so they moved him to here. And additionally, he now has access to a Mage of Shadows, which is a nice little buff to his starting army he didn't have before. All told, he's in a stronger start. It is a little bit harder because you're going to get attacked from multi-direction sooner, but it fits his campaign about going crazy, ambushing guerrilla warfare. Now we've got some other minor changes, which we're not going to load in because I don't want to spend 30 minutes waiting. So, couple changes here. Altharion the Grim has a second army starting in Tor Ves, which he always had. It is now a stronger army, meaning it's easier to defend and expand back in its homeland. The strategy of still totally ditching his start in the Badlands and retreating to Ulthwain, still arguably the best one. His victory conditions were slightly altered to take into that account, more focused on Grom the Paunch rather than anything else. As a side note, Imric here had a pretty major change. Previously, his conditions were similar to the other High Elves associated around the island of Ulthwain. Now, his victory conditions are centered around his starting location, taking out the nearby Skaven, demons, etc. Previously you had to migrate, now you don't. Okay, I guess it makes a logical change, giving him his own sort of separate campaign in the east. It's still not a very easy campaign. Now, to help with all of these changes, the High Elves in general have received a change to their intrigue influence. Some of the traits on lords and other various influence things you spent it on were unbalanced. They have since forth been balanced. Some have been buffed, some have been nerfed. I'm not going to go into the full list of them. Suffice to say, it's worth taking a glance at them just to see which ones you might now use versus ones you always took before, like decreased construction or increased income in the province. Stuff like that. Okay, here we are in Kislev. So, there's been several changes to this faction. The first, and arguably one of the most notable ones, is the Tsarina now has, immediately from the start, ice sculpting unlocked for her tech. So she gets a slight tech lead on the other Kislev fight factions. This allows her to start chaining Foss Maidens from turn 1, which is now a strategy I do recommend. Kislev still has a very rough start, so having another hero unit at the beginning is a very nice buff. In addition, previously, having access to the lower levels of the tech tree, Erengrad, Prague, and Kislev, required you to actually own the settlement. That has now been altered to, if I hover over it, you'll see it midway down the Griffin Lodge secrets, control Prague either through direct ownership or through an alliance. Now, this might not be such a huge change for either Katerine or Kostalton, but it is an immense needed change for Boris Ursus. Previously, Boris Ursus was locked to half the tech tree because he starts miles away from Kislev. Now he has the option of sending either an army or more likely a hero south, gaining vision of the Kislevite lands, allying his daughter Prague and Kostalton, and thereby having access to the lower tech trees rather than having to launch almost like an overland campaign slash crusade back to recapture the homeland, which didn't make a lot of sense since he's already kind of on one of those missions to the Chaos Wastes. And in general, it just allows people like Kostalton to gain access to Prague, where he doesn't have as easy time taking it as Katerine does. Be aware, if you're Katerine or Kostalton, it's very hard to ally the other opposing one in their struggle for power. So you may not get access to their tech tree for some time. But overall, I'd say it's a good change. An additional change, and it is worth mentioning here, and first off, I really wish Creative Assembly would patch it so that the Tsarina at least could see all of Kislev. But Erengrad down here, its dock is now cheaper, as well as gaining additional trade bonuses. Other major trades like Marienburg, Altdorf, and the others also received buffs. Overall, it's a nice change for Erengrad, allows you to build up faster, get some more money, as well as getting additional effects. Okay, here we are with the Lizardmen. And we're not going to load into these because each one of these is a minor change to each of the various lords. So to start, Tic Tac Toe himself starts with a unique Skink Chief hero with a trait. It's a nice little buff for him at the beginning, considering given time, despite being probably one of the most vanilla Lizardmen factions, he is one of the stronger ones. This makes him a little bit stronger at the start, which I think he needs. Additionally, there are some various changes to victory conditions, which I can't easily show you here, but suffice to say, Krogar, as well as Nakai's victory conditions have been localized, meaning Krogar focuses on his immediate area, Nakai focuses on the Cathay area, with a little bit of coming back to Lustria to kill off Clan Pestilence. There'll be a unique decision supposedly in the patch notes. Honestly, I haven't played it out, but the localization of victory conditions is a very nice change because it didn't make sense for you to have to travel across the world to get a victory. In addition, this guy, Oxyotl, or however you say it, can only teleport once a turn. I'm sure some of you may have seen the videos of this guy teleporting, fighting a battle, teleporting, fighting a battle, teleporting, fighting a battle, teleporting, fighting a battle, all within one turn. I managed to do 4 of his missions in one turn due to that teleport bug. Now, he has to teleport there while he can fight and win the battle. He then has to stick around for at least one turn before he can get away. Slows down your completion of their missions, as well as gives a chance that he can die after a battle or before the battle, rather than there really being no counter to his little invasions. An addition, and it is most definitely a nerf for Itza, but other factions as well. Lord Croak, previously on his Deliverance of Itza 1, 2, and 3, had no cooldown on the spells. They now have a 15-second cooldown. The reality is, it's still probably the strongest spell collection in the game. Still easily spammable, but the cooldown prevents you from just casting one of them 6 times in a row, per se. Okay, time for the Ogre Kingdoms. The first thing to talk about is how Srag the Slaughterer has gotten sick of the nice sea air down near Sartosa, and he has retreated further north into the mountains. According to the patch notes, it's a nice little joke. He is now taking over Karak Angar Gazhar. I don't know how to say it. We already know this fact. Overall, it's a nice change for this guy. He's not basically forced to fight the Vampire Coast He now has a bit more options. He's still fighting the border princes, and if you want, you can go fight Sartosa, but it's not as likely to occur. In fact, you're more likely to fight the dwarves. In particular, the Karak Hern dwarves here tend to like to attack you. A bit of an annoying occurrence is for them to use their underway stance, kind of teleport across the mountains, and then try and take your capital. Be aware that happened to me a couple times. Thankfully, the garrison buildings still holds, although not well because you're ogres. In addition, there were a couple other changes. Camps could have 2 garrison buildings in them. That was a design flaw or a patch flaw or whatever. It has since been corrected. You only get one of those 2. In fact, let's set up a camp so that I can show you that. Oh, I can't deploy the camp till I do a technology. Oops, I forgot that. Suffice to say, you can only have 1 garrison in those, which makes them a lot more vulnerable to being taken. On the other hand, and this is a huge buffs for the ogre. It's one of the largest buffs. Sky Titan Plateaus now allows you to build an additional camp for every level 5 camp you have on the map. What this means is you no longer have to destroy your old camps to expand further. You can leave your old camps there, giving you money as well as controlling an area, but now you have almost an unlimited amount of camps so long as you fully upgrade them. While it doesn't completely solve the camp bottleneck of your expansion rate, it's much more in line with how the ogres are meant to play. They're not in a crazy quick expansion faction, but now they can theoretically do a domination victory, conquer the world, whereas before being limited to what was it, 9 camps or something, was extremely crippling for the faction. In addition, their giant unit, just like all other giants units in the game, has received a buff as well. Okay, here we are with the Skaven. We're not going to load in here because the biggest change came on Queek Headtaker of Clan Moors. So he has been, I won't say entirely reworked. He's definitely been reworked to some degree, though. So first off, his previous 50% upkeep for Storm Vermin and Clan Rats in his own army has been removed. It has now been shifted to a 25% reduced upkeep faction-wide. All told, it means his personal army is more expensive, but overall, your full faction armies will be cheaper since Storm Vermin and Clan Rats are going to be the core of your army. In addition, he can purchase even more levels of the Menace below than other factions, which allows him to spawn, of course, clan rats behind the enemy lines or wherever you may need them. Now, he himself has also been changed to have an additional Lord effect. He lowers leadership on lords and heroes that are enemies by 20. This means they're way more likely to rout, because he's a head taker. His job is to take their heads. It's very strong, especially against factions that tend to run away a lot, like, or say, Skaven. But in addition, it's very strong against the vampire counts, coast, as well as tomb kings, who tend to focus heavily on strong lords. They're now weaker, more likely to start to crumble, even if they don't run away. And additionally, the costs of the menace below, food-wise, are cheaper. It's a nice little buff for this guy. There was a couple other little changes, but those are the major ones. In addition, the Warlock Engineers previously could create an Undercity, move, and create another Undercity. That has been nerfed. They now have a 10-turn cooldown. Apparently, there were too many Undercities. While it does fit the Skaven and lore, I guess it was too much for the game balance. Other changes. Tzeetch Craventail here has received a rework as well. Not as big as Queek, but previously you were incentivized to break diplomatic treaties, which didn't make a lot of sense considering no one wanted diplomatic treaties with you other than other Skaven and some Chaos factions. Instead, when you declare war on a faction for 3 turns, you get an ambush success chance of 25%, Vanguard deployment on all your units, 1 menace below use, and enemies take 50% longer to reinforce. It does stack with some of the Lightning Strike upgrades, which can be very powerful. In addition, his change to higher rank recruitment of Storm Vermin has been altered to an additional +1 armor and base weapon damage per experience level for your clan rats and storm vermins. I think this was a very good change. Yes, it does allow you to recruit weaker units, but it means fully leveled up, your units are even stronger. The flat base weapon damage is really good when you realize you can get +9, as well as their other upgrades he gets in general. Never forget, of course, his devastating flanker ability means this guy is a master of ambushes, running away and then striking. All told, not really sure about the changes. He's always suffered the problem. He's kind of like a lesser version of Queek Headtaker, and I think that still continues a bit, but it's a good step in the right direction. My thought is he needs a different mechanic similar to like Throt or something to set him apart, but who knows? And the last change that is important for the Skaven is their Doom Wheel unit has increased mass, meaning it is less likely to get bogged down in fighting. It's a nice buff for a unit whose basically design is to ride into the enemies as a kind of cavalry replacement. Okay, time for the Empire. Well, all I can say is the Empire's woes continue. This is a partial rework of Karl Franz, as well as some alterations to the Imperial Authority mechanic. It does not solve the problem that the Empire Start is difficult. I have not had nearly the problems people have been posting about, so I know it's hard, but it's not impossible. So the big change here for Karl Franz is he's received a rework. Some of this stuff, he gains more prestige. He can replenish in neutral territory, which is extremely important since his job is to defend the Empire. You can now march through the Empire provinces and replenish in them rather than having to retreat to your own provinces or go into an encampment stance just to be able to continue your offense. You also have got a charge bonus buff, if I remember correctly. Yes, that's correct. As well as you now have a 20% experience gain. The downside here is you've lost some of their gains to leadership that Franz previously had. It does mean his army is more likely to run away, but it allows for a better campaign if weaker battles. Now, there was additional changes made to how the various elector counts function. The last thing to mention here is his unique weapon, Gal Miraz, is now stronger, which is a nice change, and he's stronger when fighting chaos. In terms of the changes to the elector counts, now this is complex, and I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. So previously, you could confederate factions without a cooldown as the elector counts using their mechanics. That's been removed, so don't expect that to be a strategy. Now, you can invite elector counts to join your wars if you're allied and stuff, which is a nice change. You couldn't do it previously. It was kind of strange that people who are your friends wouldn't help you. That's changed. If you're reinforcing Empire elector counts in battles, there's a reduction in the reinforcement delay as well as the cost to move your reinforcement point. It's a general tweak that allows you to reinforce their battles better. Empire elector counts reinforcement battles, the ones you tend to pay for, have cavalry units. This is for the additional map size. It's a nice little buff for them. In addition, the issue with Imperial Authority plummeting fast has been patched to some degree. First off, Manfred occupying Drakenhof, there's now a 2-turn penalty to you before, 2-turn bonus, I should say, before you can suffer an Imperial Authority loss. Now, this comes with one benefit. It prevents a hit from Vlad from owning a province. It also can help with Festus taking out Hochland. In addition, you have one Imperial Authority loss of an elector count before you lose Imperial Authority anyway. So worry a little bit less about it. It's a nice buff. It kind of gives you 2 free Imperial Authority when it all works out. In addition, they've reworked previously when an elector count's capital was raised, you would lose Imperial Authority, but not when they were occupied, which was very strange. That has been reworked in general. If any non-Empire faction controls a Empire elector count capital, you receive a penalty. Exception being Marienburg, who already owns one. In addition, if you revived an elector from death, they would give you Imperial authority. That is different. It only happens now when you return an elector's capital. Now, what that can mean is an elector can lose their capital, lose Imperial authority, and they can still be alive. By returning the capital to them, you can give them Imperial authority without having to, say, resurrect them. It's a nice little change. I haven't fully played out all the mechanics of that. In addition, you can also give electors more land back. So if you conquer border regions, you can give it to various electors in the area. It's a nice little change. It's not going to happen in your current campaigns. You'll have to reset that all with a new campaign. In addition, Altdorf has received some patches, including the ability to build a garrison, which was a very strange mistake. And let's see what else. There's been some rework. Some of the buildings. The Altdorf Conclave of Wizard is now a level 3 rather than a tier 5 building. It's a nice one. In addition, and this is a rather big change, you have now full diplomatic relations with Marienburg, including the ability to confederate them peacefully. As far as I'm aware, they're still not considered as being part of the Empire, but they're part of your same race, so you now can confederate them. This helps a lot with the fact that previously your option to regain that elector county was to declare war and conquer them. It would be nice if there was some way to ally them, raise relations, to have them rejoin the Empire, but okay. Yeah, that's pretty much the major changes for them. The changes to the elector count, they're still working on it. And they've said they're still working on it. So hopefully it will work out to the point that the system will be improved. It's still, you can get into a death spiral where things go wrong and things keep going wrong. On the other hand, if you stop the decline, the additional prestige helps with that. So you can get more Imperial authority from events. Overall, I think it's a better position where it's at. Still needs some work as well. Okay, here we are as the Tzeetch faction Kairos Fate Weaver. He has been moved. He is no longer located in the Fortress Dawn. Instead, he's gone for a short sailing trip and has ended up south in Fate Weaver's crevasse, which makes a lot of sense considering he is the Fate Weaver. Nicely enough, you can start off by throwing a garrison in it, which I recommend, as well as upgrading it. You are currently at war with a Nurgle faction to your east. Conquering them is reasonably easy to pull off, at which point you've got an option to go west against other Tzeetch factions, and farther at the end you'll be fighting the teleporting Lizardman faction, the ghost of Hooks, or however you say it. Or you can sail north and try and take out Teclis. In my opinion, Teclis tends to declare war on you at some point, meaning it's probably worth traveling north to kill him off. At the beginning, he is at war with another Tzeetch faction. Reality is they're going to die pretty soon, and you're going to take longer to kill off Nurgle than he will to kill off his enemy. Overall, though, it's a nice change. You're not smack dab next to a Lizardman and a High Elf while potentially being invaded from yourself. Now you're just being invaded from your east and north in general. It is worth trying to ally this faction to the side if you can. They already have a non-aggression pact with you. If you can keep them alive from being killed by the Lizardman faction, it's a kind of nice confederation that you can pull off. All told, your objectives pretty similar to the way it was. Sadly, they haven't fixed this. The Fortress of Dawn is already dead at this point in history. Mistake, I think. They'll probably patch it to make it this bubonic swarm has to be destroyed. Okay, time to talk about the Wood Elves. So remember, they've received a buff to Winds of Magic, and that their magic forests provide it, as well as their captives. Now, there's been 2 reworks. Both Orion and Durthu have been altered. So let's start with Orion. So you'll see that his faction effects are different. He receives a reduction in upkeep costs for his army for every war he's in. Now, his starting location, Southern Ather-Loren, puts him at war with greenskins at the start. Usually he'll end up at war with vampires, sometimes Bretonia, sometimes not. Vampire Coast, usually the Skaven in Skaven Blight. as well as other various factions that may wander along. Quite common to have a couple Beastmen wars going. What this means is Orion's army can get stupidly cheap. It's very easy to get 40% off just by fighting 5 wars. If worse comes to worse, you can just declare war on a faction from a distance away and get a cheaper upkeep. I think it needs a little bit of patching, but hey, it's a nice change. In addition, your other armies are cheaper as well. As you expand your Wood Elf Empire and take over other forests, the maintenance cost of your armies will go down. I really like that. I wish it was for all the Wood Elf factions. That way, it would allow you to have more than just one army per forest, playing a very defensive war. It's a nice change. In addition, his Wild Hunt event no longer triggers every 20 turns, I think it was. I think it's now down to 10 turns. This means you'll be seeing the AI Wood Elf expand and be more aggressive, as well as a player, you'll be getting that event. And yes, it was 10. It was 20 turns. Is now down to 10, but the duration from 10 turns is now down to 5. Okay. You do start with the Wild Hunt active on turn 1, which is quite cool. And if you raise a settlement during the Wild Hunt, you get movement range, allowing him to race out, pillage, and then run away as well. And there's no cooldown on Deep Roots teleportation, meaning you can have him jump around to multiple forests. Basically, as Orion, wait till you get the Wild Hunt going, use that 5 turns of power to expand very rapidly. In addition, he also has another movement on top of the other lords when he raises a settlement. It's quite fun. I like the change. He needed a rework. He's got one. Now, Durthu has suffered from a problem for a while, as Creative Assembly has said. It's very similar to Drycha. So they have reworked him. So now his Treeman and ancient Treeman units can now breach walls, as well as having a buff of the annoyance of netlings, which weakens enemies in an area, and resplendent of luminescence, which buffs allies in an area. What this means is Durthu's Treemen and other forest spirit units are going to be much stronger than, say, Drychas on their own in combat, better at sieges. All told, it's a nice rework for a faction that's kind of suffered an identity crisis for a while. I still think more needs to be done to differentiate him, but it is a good change. It makes this faction a lot more interesting to, say, play. He has received some nerfs, however. It's harder for him to recruit his branch wraiths, as well as he does not get a bonus for forest battles. All told, it's a pretty good change. He also gets a spell slinger when he starts, and both he and Drycha have had some changes to when they can recruit Treeman units. They're now both at 4 rather than one being at 3 and 5. And level 3 of their Forest Spirit change requires a tier 4 settlement rather than 5 as well. As well as the very hilarious fact that if you triggered the Wild Hunt endgame, the Wood Elf factions tended to declare war on each other and sometimes would kill each other off. It was hilarious. As well as major settlements controlled by Wood Elves now have a wall in a defensive settlement battle, which helps a ranged faction considerably. And I believe that is it. We have covered every single one of the major patches in this. We are likely to see at least one other patch this year for Total Warhammer 3, and then they've said the next patches will come next year. We'll see what happens. Some of this may be changed. Who knows? We'll see how it works out. I really think the Empire needs a bit of a rework. Wood Elves and Bretonnia obviously are suffering a bit as well. But I think this puts the game in a much more healthy state than it was prior to this patch release. So if you have enjoyed this, please do like, comment, subscribe. I'm sure I screwed up on something, and you'll tell me about it. Otherwise, I'll see you in another guide, let's play, or live stream. Bye for now.